So you just built your voice agent. It works, it books the meetings, it answers the questions, it does the job. But it kind of sounds like a robot reading a script. And if you can hear it, your clients can hear it too. Now here's the thing, it's not your prompt and it's not the model. It's just a handful of settings that most people just don't understand. If you're new here, I'm Noah from SixFlow, and in the next few minutes, I'm gonna show you the exact speech and voice settings I tweak in Retell AI to make your agent actually sound like a person. Same agent, just dialed in right. All right, so we're gonna get right into it. As you can see on my screen, I'm already in a Retell AI agent. If you're unfamiliar with Retell AI's platform, I suggest you go back onto my channel and watch any video. I have loads of them explaining Retell AI, breaking down how to build an agent and things like that. This video is solely dedicated to showing you how to improve your settings to make your voice agent sound a lot more natural. And we're gonna hop into it first by discussing the voice that you select. So by default, you're gonna be selected on a platform voice, which is provided by Retell AI. So if you tap in the voice here, you'll see you'll have platform voices and you also have custom providers. Now, of course, there are a bunch to choose from and you can even filter by gender and accent and things like that. But in my personal opinion, the two best voices that I use are one, Simo from Retell, and two, Brian from ElevenLabs. These are the two voices I use most for female and male because of course the voice itself will help in how natural your agent actually sounds. But regardless, I want to walk you through the platform voice settings first. So as you can see, if you are selected on a platform voice, you can tap on these settings right here and you'll see two options. The first is going to be speed and the second is going to be volume. Now, generally, you can just leave these as is unless your client specifically requests that your agent is speaking too slow or it's a little quiet. You can play around with these, but I've never actually ran into that situation. I always keep it on the default. Now, you can also see here that there is a third option, which is dynamically adjust based on user input. And now this is solely pertaining to the voice speed itself. And essentially what it's saying is if you want your voice agent to actually adjust its speed based on the input from the user, whether they're talking really fast or really slow, it can actually do that. Now, I've messed around with this a bit and it doesn't actually do the best. So I tend to leave it off for now. I'm going to continue to test it going forward to see if it actually gets better because it is a pretty interesting feature. Let's move on. Let's say you have a voice selected and it's actually a custom provider. So like I just said, let's head over to the ElevenLabs Brian. I'm going to press select voice. And now if I go into settings, you'll see that we have a couple more options to choose. So like we just discussed, we still have voice speed and voice volume. And you can see here, it actually toggled this on automatically. I'm going to turn that off. And now we have a new field that is voice temperature. And essentially what this is saying is the lower the value is, the more calm the agent is going to be. And the higher the value, the more emotional. If you hover over it, you'll see that it says that exactly right here. So if you are dealing with a certain use case where you want your agent to be a bit more emotional, like customer support, for example, you can actually turn up the voice temperature as you wish. However, I will point out that you don't necessarily need to do it this way anymore because now that Retell has introduced the Agent Handbook, which is prompt injections into your actual voice agent, you can go over to the personality and tone section of your Agent Handbook and just toggle on the high empathy. This is essentially going to inject a snippet into your prompt to tell the agent that it needs to be a little more empathetic when it's talking to its callers. So that's just a second way to adjust the temperature of your voice agent. Now going back into the settings, the other option that we had is the voice model. So these are all of ElevenLabs models. And like I always say, the best one to keep it on is the Flash V2. There are certain situations where you may want to change this, such as if you're building a multilingual agent, you may want to switch to the multilingual V2. But generally speaking, the best model for every use case is going to be ElevenLabs Flash V2. And that's why it is automatically chosen. So I would suggest you just leave it on this if you're going to use any of ElevenLabs provided voices. Okay, so now I want to move on into the Retell AI configuration settings. So the main one and the one we're going to focus on for this video is going to be speech settings because this controls a lot of how your agent actually sounds. I'm just going to walk through these so I can let you know exactly what each of these are actually doing rather than just showing you what the best settings to use are. So let's get into it. The first one is going to be background sound, and this one is pretty self-explanatory. If you tap on this drop down, you'll see that we have options to choose a background noise. We got coffee shop, convention hall, summer outdoor, and so on. I've actually never had a use case where I've used a background sound. Clients tend to not want this. But of course, if you do want it, you can actually select whichever one you want. And the new feature that Retell just added is actually adjusting the volume of the background sound. And to do that, you just hit on the settings button and you can adjust the volume here. But in my personal opinion, I don't think background sound makes your voice agent sound any better or worse. So I tend to just leave it off. Now, response eagerness is a massive setting and it's generally misunderstood. What this is actually doing is when the user is done speaking or pauses from their speech, it's how quickly the transcription gets sent to the LLM to generate a response convert it into voice, and then send that response back. Now, the reason this is actually very important is because a lot of people tend to just focus solely on latency. I want the lowest latency for my voice agent, so I'm going to pump the responsiveness all the way up. And you would be correct in doing that because that does result in the lowest latency. However, there's a catch, because in many use cases, when it's actually a conversation being had between the voice agent and the caller, not every person is going to speak fluently without any pauses in their speech. So for example, if the user takes a moment to think about what they're about to say next, like if the agent asks them a question and they have to pause just to think about what they're going to respond, the response eagerness can actually trigger the agent to assume that the user is done talking, so it sends a transcription to the LLM to generate a response back, and that's how interruptions get involved. So generally what I'll do is lower this to about 0.96, sometimes 0.95 after some testing. And what this is going to do is 0.01 of the response eagerness is equal to about 50 milliseconds of latency. So by reducing it by 0.04, we've introduced 200 milliseconds of latency into the voice agent. But this is very important to do, because if you do want your voice agent to sound less robotic and like it's following a script and like it's having errors and interrupting the user, which a lot of people find very annoying, you don't want the latency to be as high as possible if it's going to introduce those annoyances. So I generally recommend lowering this just a bit, that it doesn't massively affect the latency, but it does allow the agent to perform more human-like. And again, we see that there is a dynamically adjustable based on user input. I haven't used this yet in practice, but again, similar to the voice speed dynamics, I am going to continue to test it. And when I see that it's at a place where it's actually performing really well, I will tend to start using it. But for now, I'm just going to leave that off, and we're going to move on to interruption sensitivity, which is another massive setting. So interruption sensitivity, essentially what this is saying is how quickly will the voice agent stop speaking when it hears audio input. Now, this is typically a setting that can actually vary based on your use case. If the callers tend to have a lot of background noise, for example, you're going to want to lower the interruption sensitivity, because if the voice agent is picking up background noise and is constantly getting interrupted, that's going to be a very large annoyance. However, at the same time, if the user does want to interrupt the agent to say something else and the agent just continues talking for even if it's half a second, it is really annoying to deal with. So there's definitely a sweet spot that you want to put the interruption sensitivity on. And generally, I would say this is around 0.7. But just to give you a demonstration, I want to pump this all the way up so we can see how fast it actually stops when I interrupt it. And then we'll lower it down and we'll see the difference.
Hello, how can I help you today?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey,
Stop. That was pretty quick. That was pretty quick. So that's how fast it stops when it's pumped all the way up. But what that also means is, let's say a user has the agent on speaker and they put their phone on the desk, the agent's going to get interrupted and lose its train of thought, and it's going to have to restart. Or if you have kids yelling in the background, the agent's going to get interrupted. So that's definitely no good. But now let's lower it all the way down to, let's say 0.5, which usually it would never go lower than this. And let's see how long it takes to actually interrupt it.
Hello, how can I help you today?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey,
Stop. It didn't even get interrupted at that point. So you can see there is definitely a massive difference in how much this setting controls. If you're not exactly sure the correct setting to choose for this, I would stick with something like 0.7, but through your testing, you should introduce different types of background noise in different conditions so that you can see how the agent is actually getting interrupted in a real life call. Okay, and now I'm just going to pause from speech settings for just a sec, because there are a few settings that used to go in here and are now in the Agent Handbook, and I just want to touch on them really quick. So if you head over to the Agent Handbook, the first one you're going to see is a natural filler word. So again, the Agent Handbook is prompt injections into your voice agent, meaning that Retell AI designed engineered prompt snippets that it's going to input into your voice agent prompt if you toggle these on. Now, the first one is natural filler words, and this used to be called back channeling. And what this is saying is you're allowing your voice agent to use common human filler words such as or you know or yeah while it's actually talking. So this is definitely a setting I tend to turn on a lot because it makes it sound a lot more natural. And then the second one is under accuracy and format, and this is speech normalization. And this is actually a really big one. I always enable this because what it's doing is taking symbols and turning them into naturally spoken human form. So for example, the $ symbol, if you want your agent to read that out as $24.12, you're going to want this on, because if it's not on, it might read it as $24.12, and that just sounds ridiculous. So you definitely want to turn on speech normalization. Those are two settings that I tend to always turn on for all of my agents, so I don't think we need to touch too much on those because they're pretty self-explanatory, and I honestly think they should always be turned on. Okay, so now let's get back to the speech settings. The next one is reminder message frequency. Now this one's a little iffy. I'm not sure I'm a big fan of it. I usually pump it up to like a minute, let's say, because what this is doing is if there's silence on the call, the agent is going to remind the user, hey, are you still there? So this can get a little bit annoying if it's doing it too early while users, just in the middle of something or thinking of a response or whatever. So I tend to not actually use this often, but once we get to the call settings, you'll see why. All right, so the next field is going to be pronunciation. Now I've pretty much never had to use this. There was one time where I built a voice agent for an MMA gym, and one of the words that the agent just could not say for its life was the word gi, like a jujitsu gi. So I actually used the pronunciation function, which helped out a bit. And all you do is you press add and you can put in the word, like here I put in gi and I give it a phoneme. Phoneme is essentially how that word is spelled out, but how it actually sounds. Now, this actually did help out a bit, but what helped out more, in my opinion, was putting this in the actual prompt itself. So within the actual prompt of the voice agent, I would include something like this, where I'm telling it exactly how to pronounce the word. I'm telling it how it rhymes. Never say these variations, which occurred during the testing, obviously. But funny enough, this agent was actually pretty old. Like, it's been running for almost a year now. And I went back and I did my monthly updates like I do for all my clients, and the agent actually performs a lot better now with that specific word. So I was able to actually remove this from the prompt, which is really good. But that's just a specific use case where I actually had to use the pronunciation. In most cases, I find that the agent is actually able to pronounce everything pretty clearly. So I haven't had much issues with that. However, I just wanted to point it out that if you are experiencing that, then this is a good tool to use. But nonetheless, if you are experiencing pronunciation issues, you definitely want to include it in the prompt itself as well, and not just use the pronunciation feature. Okay, and that covers everything in the speech settings. There's just two more things that I want to touch on, and the next one is very quick. Under the welcome message, depending on whether the AI speaks first or the user speaks first, and this is pretty much whether it's an inbound or an outbound, usually with the AI receptionist or when it's an inbound voice agent, you want the AI to speak first, because normally when you call someone else, it's the other person that speaks first and says, hello, how can I help you, right? So a big thing that makes a voice agent sound a little bit more natural is the pause before speaking. You can see that this is a setting right here if you're on the welcome message selected on AI speaks first. And this is pretty self-explanatory. What it's saying is how long should the agent wait before saying its opening message. This is generally set to 0 seconds. However, I actually turn this up to usually 0.6. And the reason for that is because a lot of the times when someone calls, the agent will start speaking instantly before people put their phone to their actual ear. And it's just like a little bit unnatural. When I test these agents and I actually do this, by the time I bring the phone to my ear, it's already done its welcome message and it doesn't make much sense. So adding a very small pause at the start of the call is completely natural, and it actually has helped out a lot. Now let's move on. There's actually another one that I did want to bring in really quickly, even though I said there's only 2 left, but that's going to be the transcription settings. Now I won't spend too much time here because the default options for this are majority of the time the ones you're actually going to want to use. And I want to touch on 2 things. The first is going to be the denoising mode, which is generally just set on remove noise. However, if you're noticing issues that your agent keeps on getting interrupted when there's background noise, even if you adjust the interruption sensitivity like we discussed earlier, and it's getting to a point where the interruption sensitivity is getting way too low because of the background speech, that the user can't actually interrupt the agent anymore, and that's not what we want because that's really annoying, like I said earlier. The other option is you can turn up the interruption sensitivity a bit higher, and we can just turn on remove noise plus background speech. Now what this is just going to do is tighten the audio input to remove extra noise. So if you do find that your agent keeps on getting interrupted even when your interruption sensitivity is lower than the average, you can try turning on remove noise plus background speech and see if that helps. But like I just said, this is a rare occurrence that you're ever going to use. I generally just keep it on remove noise and it always performs perfectly. But I wanted to point that out just in case you've actually experienced that and it may be useful to you. Now the second one is going to be the transcription mode. We have optimized for speed and we have optimized for accuracy. Now I actually used this quite a bit before Retell AI added in their handbook the echo verification as well as the NATO phonetic alphabet, because those in itself are optimizing for accuracy when collecting information like emails, names, and stuff like that. So ever since this has been released, the optimize for accuracy has actually been less useful in my opinion, and we generally just want to optimize for speed. Now that being said, if you want to be extremely careful that your agent is collecting information extremely accurate, then you might want to optimize for accuracy in this case. But what I would say is leave it on optimize for speed unless you're noticing issues with it collecting actual information. And then finally, vocabulary. So general versus medical. I mean, if you're building a medical receptionist or a medical AI voice agent, then you can switch this to medical, no problem. And that's pretty much all I wanted to touch on with the transcription settings. So the last section is going to be the call settings. Now, a couple of these aren't actually applicable to making your voice agent sound less robotic, but I still want to walk you through them because there are important ones to go over. So first of all, voicemail detection. I always turn this on for outbound agents. But if you're building an inbound agent, it really doesn't matter much because it's not going to be leaving any voicemails since it's the one receiving the calls. This is another new feature that Retell AI recently added, and it's the call screen handling. So we can predefine a message for when the call screen picks up for certain people. again, more useful for outbound agents, not very necessary for inbound agents. IVR hangup, again, for outbound agents, not for inbound. The user keypad input detection. So this is only necessary if you have anything inside your system that allows keypad detection to do certain features. If you don't, I would generally just turn this off. And here's where I wanted to get to: the end call on silence. So right now, the default is set to 10 minutes, and it's a little bit ridiculous because if you're on the phone for 10 minutes and there's not a word spoken, there's no reason for the agent to stay on the phone that long. It's pretty much just burning your money for no reason. I'll generally lower this to like a minute, maybe even 30 seconds. But if you want to play it safe, you could lower it to 2 minutes. But if you really think of it, if you're on the phone and it's silent for even like 10 seconds, something seems a little off and you're going to be like, hello, is anyone there, right? So 2 minutes is very, very generous. I would say about 30 seconds is the sweet spot for end call on silence. And it's something you definitely want to turn down because you don't want to waste your money. And Retell AI has the default at 10 minutes for no reason at all. So I'm not sure exactly why. The second option is max call duration. Again, set to 1 hour on default, but like, who's on the phone for an hour, especially not a voice agent? I think the general rule of thumb is you want to have your max call duration less than double the absolute maximum call that it would receive. So practically speaking, this is usually 10 minutes, but let's say it's even 15 minutes. I don't think it would be anything higher than that unless the agent that you're building is a high level qualification agent that has to run through many questions, let's say. Then in that case, you may want to bump up this just a bit to play it on the safe side, because if this limit is reached, the agent will hang up, no questions. Practically speaking, I usually keep this around 10 or 15 minutes. And that is pretty much it. The only other thing to mention is the LLM model. Now, I highly suggest using GPT 4.1. It's the most reliable. It's the most practical in all cases, pretty much. And it's been proven to just perform the best with these AI voice agents as of right now. There are a few settings that you can actually adjust for it, but I would leave those on default. They've performed perfectly for me every single time. I've never actually changed them. So other than that, as long as you follow this guide and make sure you have a proper understanding of the call settings, the speech settings, the voice settings, you'll be able to make your voice agent sound a lot more natural and get rid of that robotic tone and flow that you're probably experiencing right now. Oh, and by the way, if you're new to voice AI and starting to sell or just starting to learn to build these AI voice agents, I do run a school community, which I'll link in the description below, where you can check it out. We teach you how to build any type of voice agent. We teach you how to market them, sell them, and essentially we teach you how to build a voice AI agency from the ground up. So if that's something you're interested, just tap that link in the description below. Now, that being said, I hope you guys found this video useful. If you did, hit that like button and drop a sub, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.